The rambunctious and opportunistic Quematrice is always on the lookout for its next meal. And as a scavenger, those can be harder to find than people realise, especially as Quematrice is often forced to play second fiddle to larger carnivores. It's also a very ornate brute, adorned with the wattles and scoots that all play a role in its day-to-day life, which we'll now explore. So Quematrice is an unusual looking brute for sure, resembling a giant carnosaur rooster. Their peculiar head ornaments can tell a lot about an animal, and in Quematrice are well worth discussing in depth, as there are several interpretations one can make. One may also wonder why exactly roosters and chickens have these ornaments themselves, and in such birds they're used to woo mates. To impress females, male jungle fowl, the wild ancestor of modern domestic chickens, will engage in tidbitting. This is a display where the male finds a particularly appealing food item, and then repeatedly drops and picks it up again. As he does so, the wattles draw more attention to the display, and keep the female interested and more receptive. Males will also tidbit more vigorously with higher value food items, increasing the prevalence of the display in tandem with food quality. Colour may also help too, and jungle fowl show a strong preference for both the colour red overall and in their wattles and combs. All of this fits pretty well with Quematrice so far. Quematrice is in fact a scavenger, typically consuming only the bodies of already deceased animals. And while many view scavenging as the easy option compared to predation, it's actually a difficult and exhausting method of foraging, with not all carrion being made equal. The fresher the better really, for both nutrient and water content. The tidbitting theory would mesh well with this, with male Quematrice using it to both show females where they'd found carrion, and also to symbol better, fresher carrion more successfully, to hopefully get the attention of a female and then hopefully woo them. But this assumes that the Quematrice we fight are all male, which may or may not be true. In-game, different explanations are given for the wattles, rather suggesting they may serve roles in combat. It's said they may serve as decoys against larger carnivores, but this doesn't sound like an especially good explanation. Having a decoy on top of your vulnerable head isn't a great decoy. And also against sympatric monsters, the decoy doesn't seem like it would be very effective. A troop of Deshagama would just beat it to death. Balahara can't even see, and a decoy won't make a difference to Raidow's skeleton divine death blast. An alternate explanation is given, that it may play a role in signalling in combat, presumably with other Quematrice, with the adornments being a signal of aggression. And this does fit a lot better. Wattles and other such ornaments can play a role in signalling fitness and combative ability, changing shape, size and colour in conjunction with the condition of the animal. This is the case in pheasants, where the size of the wattle shows off the amount of testosterone the male has, as well as bodily condition, resulting in the males with the biggest wattles being the top birds. In rock ptarmigan, they have red combs that come out in the breeding season when the males fight. When both males are suitably aggressive and don't flee, they often attack each other's combs in combat, and so a successful male with intact combs could well have them as an indicator of dominance and fighting ability that would be attractive to females. The combs are used in such displays for the females by the males, and intact combs are much more attractive than larger ones too. In jungle fowl again, when push comes to shove, comb size is the strongest correlate for males to win a fight, and is directly related to blood testosterone levels too. All of this can likely apply to Quematrice as well. The combs are indeed said to be used in shows of aggression, and males may also try to go for each other's combs, which may lend some support to the decoy statement, if used as such in intra-specific combat against other Quematrice. It's possible for the females that such crests may be more attractive, but it's also possible that the crests have little sexual function, and are found in both sexes, and this also isn't unheard of too. In South Island saddlebacks, both males and females have the wattles, and with little discrepancy in the relative sizes of them too. They seem to play a role in territorial defence for both of them. Whilst males generally try to lead the charge when the two sexes were paired, females would readily engorge the wattles when alone and facing competition, Both sexes having such display features indicates intense, year-long resource competition for both sexes, and this also applies well to Quematrice as well with their scavenging lifestyle. The difficulty of carrion acquisition combined with the variable quality of carrion resources, especially in an arid to semi-arid environment, may result in selection for both males and females to be large, aggressive and well ornamented, with minimal sexual dimorphism, as the females need such food resources as much as the males do as well. Both sexes could potentially use the wattles and their size, colour and condition to display to other Chemrice at carrion, which may happen fairly frequently and be a better option than engaging in a costly physical brawl, reserved as a last resort. But as said, much of this remains speculation until the Wilds book comes out to hopefully shed more light on such things, especially any possible sexual dimorphism in Quematrice. Indeed, much of Quematrice's design and ecology is ruled by its need for carrion, and its role as a scavenger. Whilst Chemrice may seem bulky and powerful enough to take down herbivores like Keratinoth, and it probably can, it may not be especially good at catching them. Lack of speed or lack of behavioural technique may limit it in this regard. As is the case with many scavengers, Chemrice is said to rarely hunt its own prey, and for many scavengers this is the same, that they may still have an opportunistic pop at things occasionally, especially if there's some seasonal factor that may result in easy prey. Both brown and striped hyenas aren't especially good hunters, being mainly scavengers unlike their spotted cousins, and have their hunting behaviour described as a primitive chase and grab affair. Quematrice is likely the same in this regard, having short chases or a hopeful snap at things, but not going much further. In regard to Quematrice's cutscene, it's worth noting that it had essentially already stolen the meat, and was pursuing the felines to take it back, rather than try and eat them too, although it's not impossible it may have done so for dessert. For all of its lack of speed and stealth, like many scavengers, Chemrice isn't necessarily weak, even if it's a comparatively low-ranking monster in both Wild's roster and overall. Chemrice's chunky body and robust legs are needed to drag large carcasses back to its den. This food storing is commonplace in terrestrial scavengers, and is often an artifact of them being comparatively low-ranking in the greater scheme of things, as resting by a carcass is both risky and may result in it being stolen. Just as the smaller hyenas are outranked by their spotted cousins, as well as sympatric cats like lions and tigers, so too is Chemrice outranked by Dashagama, Balahara and Raidau, all of which may well steal carrion if they find Chemrice on it, and may consider eating the brute too. We do see Chemrice's lair is full of bones stored there as well, and while scavengers often prefer fresh meat, they're still well able to crunch up bone for both mineral and marrow fat content. These bones may not just be leftovers, but can also serve as a worthwhile nest egg as such food is cheap to transport and lasts well in the plains, being a good backup should better carrion sources dry up. Chemrice is well designed to eat bone too, and is described as having large robust molars like a hyena for this very purpose. Also prevalent are the large tusk-like teeth on the mandible akin to canines, in what is a very mammal-like dentition. And similar to hyenas and especially scavenging bone-cracking ones, these likely act like meat hooks, digging into the carrion to hold it in place, as they haul it over long distances as both creatures do. Chemrice lives in the Windward Plains, a highly seasonal and semi-arid savanna, bordering on desert. This is likely the preferred environment, and also one that supplies a fair amount of carrion. A combination of thunderstrikes, the sand tide and seasonal harshness may well kill a fair amount of large herbivores like Delphodon and Keratinoth, and even occasionally larger monsters too, that keep Chemrice reasonably well fed, as scavengers often benefit greatly from things like droughts and other periods of prolonged and heightened mortality. Indeed, the harshness of the sand tide in its electrical storms was apparently set up as either some form of defense against monsters, or a killing field to harvest them in. The high mortality this may have resulted in, prior to both adaptations to such conditions and the fall of Wyveria, may have resulted in an attractive area for Chemrice on top of it already being their natural habitat. The population of Quematrice in the ruins of Wyveria is interesting in this regard too, as there doesn't seem to be a lot of carrion for them. The Guardians don't need food, Arkveld has only been conscious for a few weeks, and Shei-Wu isn't the type to leave leftovers. It's possible Quematrice either initially followed the Sacreds carting monster pieces to steal them, or the Wyverians had a captive population for one reason or another that went feral after their downfall. But Quematrice doesn't just eat those slain by natural mortality, and is said to especially feed on the kills of other monsters. And in this regard it is worth pondering who may be the most important donator of carrion to Quematrice. Real terrestrial scavengers can occasionally have most important species. For brown hyena and Kalahari, their most important supplier of carrion are lions, who often make and partially leave big kills like Chemsbok and wildebeest. For brown hyenas, and as is suggested for Quematrice too, natural mortality can supply a fair amount and is the second most important source as well. In the Makadigadi pans, zebra are the most important species scavenged, which are also the main prey of lion in the area too, so again the big cats may be subsidizing the hyenas. In fenced reserves in Namibia, the high density of leopards seemingly supplies them with the bulk of their carrion, so smaller cats can take up this role as well. So in the plains, who is most likely to be Quematrice's primary benefactor? And it does seem to be most likely to be the wiry and opportunistic Talioth. As well as generally slicing anything in their path to ribbons, the Talioth are clearly well adapted to prey on the Keratinoth herds. With their overlapping cross-billed jaws, these likely function identically to, well, a crossbill, who wrinkle their bills into pine cones to separate the scales and acquire the nutritious seeds within. Albeit with Talioth, it's wrinkling their jaws into the armoured hides of still-living Keratinoth to cause enough blood loss to kill them and start feeding. The long, thin heads of Talioth, that are loosely the same width as the jaws, likely follow on from this, with the Talioth essentially inserting their entire heads into the opening their jaws make to access muscle and organ in the carcass. Why the Talioth don't have a drome or grate, as seen in many other species of small social bird wyvern, may be answered by the environment and the prey. As suggested in the drome video, without large prey to necessitate their evolution, dromes may never arise in some populations, or even be selected against. The Keratinoth, which are considerably smaller than Aptonoth or Apsaros, may not be large enough to necessitate drome adaptation. On top of this, their fine armour may influence things too. Their small Talioth presumably can't tip over Keratinoth themselves to reach the soft underbelly, and if Keratinoth either crouch in the side, or even just die lying down, the Talioth may otherwise struggle to eat without their crossbill mouths, so they need to develop a method of feeding that would still be ostensibly fatal, and the same way they eat a dead Keratinoth is the same way they kill a live one. So if the small Talioth want to eat, they have to be able to kill it themselves in a way that required specialist equipment over brute strength. Thus, the fact Keratinoth provide as much a challenge just to eat as to kill may result in their exceptional and unusual morphology that then means the extra firepower a drone provides isn't necessary for their takedown, with how well equipped the smaller wyverns already are. This all benefits Quematrice nicely. It has animals which are regularly killing large prey for it, who only live in groups of 5 or 6 at most, and which crucially don't have a large drome, which may otherwise provide resistance to its kill theft. As is occasionally the case with scavengers, as well as taking food passively after they've eaten, Quematrice may directly usurp it in the action of Kleptoparasitism, with concept art also showing this behaviour, and the Talioth likely being the smaller carnivores referred to in Quematrice's description. As with hyenas, it's possible Quematrice even trail Talioth if it sees them hunting to potentially steal a meal early. Talioth are small, and so may not use too much of a Keratinoth, but if they stay close to a kill, they may pick it clean if possible. When finding a dead Keratinoth, Quematrice will turn it over to make sure there's still sufficient biomass to make it worth carrying off. The way Talioth eat likely means they just hollow out the carcass, and leave the otherwise good-looking husk for Quematrice to find. In the plains, other monsters may still occasionally throw Chemrice a bone with a kill, but likely not enough to make significant contributions. Their visiting Deshagama seem unlikely, as with large bodies, strong jaws and social groups, they likely completely consume their kills, and would probably just try to eat Chemrice too. Balahara are also both similarly unlikely and similarly risky, using sand traps to capture prey that they can preferentially swallow whole, but also occasionally swarming in large groups as well. So even in the unlikely event of leftovers, they're probably already buried beneath the sand. Radau likely doesn't provide much carrion either. A handful of large and carnivorous flying wyverns exhibit central place foraging, where they take kills back to a certain location for consumption. In some cases, this is a seasonal and behavioural thing, with the wraths doing so when they have chicks, or when they get disturbed by another monster. But other wyverns like Radau itself will also engage in this sort of foraging for one reason or another too, and it seems to do so in an obligate way. This behaviour obviously greatly limits the amount of carrion available, and whilst they may occasionally leave either an abandoned carcass or a slain rival for Chemrice to eat, they're probably fairly minimal contributors. In the case of some large carnivorous wyverns, they may even provide a detriment. Many such wyverns will occasionally scavenge when there's the opportunity, and especially powerful and dangerous species like Basiljuice, Deviljo, Tigrex and Rathalos may frequently be attracted to carrion, which isn't especially good for Chemrice, who doesn't have much option to hunt otherwise. Smaller scavengers can often be killed at carcasses by their original owners or new investors, and in some cases on notable levels for a population scale. The smaller and solitary brown hyena was initially believed to have been pushed out of areas like the Greater Kruger National Park, as management policies installing new waterholes resulted in more spotted hyenas, who were also attracted to carrion even with their own hunting abilities, as well as being pretty hostile to brown hyenas. With both the hyenas and the wyverns, a combination of greater ability to dominate at important carcass resources and direct mortality may result in Chemrice faring poorly in some otherwise ideal-looking areas. In some places there can be peace, and areas with high prey density have seemingly facilitated high densities of both brown and spotted hyenas, without the suppression mentioned in some other areas. But in this regard, it could be worth discussing what other areas Chemrice, which is confirmed to have a more westerly distribution, could appear in, and their lack of presence in older titles. A notable point to start could be that Chemrice generally needs open areas, with fair enough numbers of prey to provide carrion. Indeed, much like cursorial dogs and the herding herbivores they hunt, scavenging, prey-caching hyenas are an invention of the Miocene's environmental changes resulting in open grasslands that facilitates this behaviour by creating enough concentrated carrion and the climactic conditions so it's not just claimed quickly by ants or microbes in a humid forest. So this already explains why Chemrice is only now known to the player base, because the vast majority of older maps were either mainly forested environments or pure desert, rather than the true grasslands Chemrice prefers. The Forest and Hills is one such map it could hypothetically be found in, but high wrath presence and densities may suppress Chemrice to some degree. There is a quest mentioning Arathian and Chemrice fighting for a prolonged period that was presumably resulting in the Chemrice coming off worse, at least if the copy and pasted turf war is anything to go by. Undoubtedly the best and most well-matched habitat is of course the sandy plains, which is functionally the same sort of environment as the Windward Plains in the east. Despite the risk posed by large predators like Tigrex or Deviljo, the semi-aridity may lower their densities enough for Chemrice to sneak in. Here it may well replace the Talioth with Jaggies, and may contest great Jaggies in their packs for the hard-won kills. With larger game like Aptonoth on offer, it may also take up a more passive scavenger role, if unable to overwhelm the large males and their cohorts of Jaggia too. Such prey items could also have a higher mortality in the plains than the more directly desert-adapted herbivores like Keratinoth, or Renaplos and Apsaros too, and thus provide Chemrice with much of the meat it needs, with not as much need for trailing other, more active carnivores. As well as the occasional panic of dealing with things larger than it, Chemrice may still face stiff competition for carrion in the plains from smaller things too. Barnos are described as scavengers too, and presumably behave like large wyvern versions of vultures or condors. They're fairly numerous in the Konafa skies, and can presumably amass quite quickly at carcasses, and may well be able to pick a kill clean before anyone else gets there. A big thing working against land-based scavengers is the advantages aerial ones already have, and especially social aerial ones like vultures. Chemrice's bullying may come in handy here, and even against a rattling horde of barnos, it still likely dominates. As some carnivores may do so as well, it could also watch barnos itself to see if they drop and then use them to find carrion for itself as well. After all, bluster is a big part of Quematrice's life, and it's suggested that the use for Quematrice's big flammable tail is intimidation, which fits well with Quematrice's role as both a scavenger and a kleptoparasite. Despite its similarity to selective symbols in birds like roosters or peacocks, this utility means it's likely a factor in both sexes with how useful it is in acquiring carrion. The fire is believed to come from a thick oil-like substance secreted along the tail, that seems to then become either aerosolized or gives off a flammable gas, that is then ignited from the friction between the numerous pleats on the tail. These pleats are presumably dead and /or cornified tissue, and so aren't as damaged by the fire, or are just being constantly regrown as they're sloughed or burned off. Possibly as the Chemrice ancestor or early form approached an occupied kill, it may have lashed the ground with its tail in an attempt to make a noisier and more intimidating display, which at one point resulted in a combustion and then selection for those with this extra intimidating display. Why Chemrice has thick oily substances dripping from its tail is likely for scent marking purposes. As said some time ago in Anjanath's video, brute wyverns can often be seen marking their territory with various adaptive actions or substances that are analogous to either urine or oily scent marks seen in mammals, as well as being a way that brutes, despite being theropod shaped, can often be somewhat mammal-coded. This fits with them being a family of both frequent inter- and intra-specific conflict. For Chemrice, as it moves through the savannas, it's likely dripping this oily substance on any plant matter, rock, anthill, or general structure its tail brushes past. To compare to the Hyenidae again, it's possible the oil may have a double function. The aerosol may blow away or dissipate quickly, but the initial oil may stick to things, leading to two notices. A long and short-term one. Brown hyenas will paste on items, as all hyenas do, to scent mark, but they also leave a double pasting, a short-term black one and a long-term white one. The short-term one is believed to be for the members of its own clan, to tell them to forage elsewhere as it already has this place covered. For the more limited non-aerial scavengers, groups would provide little extra help in finding carrion when smell is used to locate it. The longer-term one is a more typical territorial scent mark. For brown hyenas, this is due to the fact the clans split up to forage, and they're likely to be related to other animals foraging in the same area. So it's a way to help your kin forage too. For Chemrice, we could make two suggestions. One, that mated pairs will stay in one area, and this is a similar thing to help them forage more efficiently for both themselves and their young. Or two, that this doubles as an unsteady truce for other Chemrice. In theory, one Chemrice could follow the fresh oil trail of another, and hopefully steal its food. But this may only work if the latter finds a big kill it can't consume quickly. Small meals can be eaten quickly, and so there'd be little for another to steal. If Chemrice generally fight a lot, both full stop and over kills, then this could be one way to reduce needless, costly and dangerous conflict, at least to some degree, by letting your hostile neighbours know where you are. There may be some landscape effects of Chemrice and its usage of fire too, as well as ones on other animals. In Karapako's video, it was suggested the bird wyvern has the means and the brains to potentially start grass fires, to flush out small prey for it to eat as some raptors do. But for the scavenging Chemrice, this seems less likely. But Chemrice could still help other species with such burnings. The migratory amstrigians prefer to eat the large emperor hoppers that live in the grasslands, and grasshoppers can indeed be a substantial source of food for seasonal migrants raising a family. Should Chemrice spark a flame, It may help foraging considerably in flushing huge numbers of grasshoppers for Amstridian to eat, as the description of the hoppers mentions, as well as making them easier to catch afterwards. And in our own world, grass fires often cause sizable invertebrate swarms that attract birds keen to profit off them. Chemrice can still benefit from any unintended fires too. As a scavenger, any animal too slow to escape the fire will provide it with a cooked meal. Chemrice's fire, despite the possible risk it may pose if it catches them short, could potentially benefit the people of Konafa too. Smoke can make harvesting honey from the nearby hives easier, and burning the grass could unveil useful items and minerals for crafting, like bone and fulgurite, similar to some methods of specific item hunting used by some indigenous peoples today. So whilst Chemrice itself is a worry, it may still have some uses. It may have also had some impact on the people of Konafa too. It is worth noting they do seem to be vegetarian, whilst the other settlements all have some, or a large meat or other animal protein element to their meals, except for Sild with their disgusting, offensive and protein-free raw garlic and unwashed kale combo. The bulk of Konafa's protein comes from milk and cheese instead. Whilst Chemrice can presumably digest cheese, it may not register it as food, and may result in Chemrice having little reason to investigate the village. This may be a deliberate choice formed over time as Konafa generally tries to avoid conflict with monsters. Any form of meat would attract Chemrice, so the solution was as simple as not having it, or indeed just not eating meat to keep themselves safe in combination with the gem chimes. This may often also make Chemrice a thorn in the side of hunters, as it ransacks camps in search of steak and rations it can smell. A combination of the ever-roaming Chemrice and the precious resource of desert herbivores, with their ability to convert thorny bushes into milk and wool, that could be worth more if alive and sustainable, may have led them down a mostly vegetarian path. It's been speculated that early humans could have had such relationships with assorted carnivores in our past, with some making fruity suggestions that the short-faced bear was a major human deterrent, due to being so huge and scary and badass. But this didn't receive much support. Cave hyenas have been similarly suggested, and may well have competed with both humans and Neanderthals for caves and carrion alike. But ultimately there doesn't seem to be much direct evidence for the slowing of any distribution or advancement. Overall, the strong yet subtle impact Chemrice has had on the people of Konafa is likely testament to the fact it's generally the size of a T-Rex itself, but also incendiary and harder to kill. Overall, it's something generally worth avoiding. Chemrice is a monster that's grown on me a lot, and that I generally quite like. Fight-wise, I think he might actually be the best of Wild's early game selection, and is probably the most damaging monster up until Balahara, with some of his tail moves generally packing a fair wallop. Chemrice was made as an area of effect monster to follow up after Chatacabra's direct hit monster, and I think it generally succeeds on all bases, as an early game AoE fight, fire monster, brute and resident of the plains. As a weak spot though, I do generally get the impression there was meant to be more to Chemrice that got lost in development. In a one-word interview with Fujioka, he described it as a bully, and its concept art shows it fighting Talioth, which its description also likely alludes to, but this doesn't really happen and isn't built on in-game. Similarly, monster AI and pathing means that whilst Chemrice does scavenge, and cache carrion, you almost never see this happen. He does still have some good personality though, and I do assume it's intentional that Chemrice always wants to destroy camps, presumably to try and steal your food. I'll also never forget that after slaying Frenzy Darkfeld, as Nata and Alma tried to wax poetic from the wind's gasp in a cutscene, all I could focus on was the two Chemrice beating the snot out of each other in the middle distance. When you get to Chemrice's design though, things get really interesting. Chemrice pulls from a lot of areas for its final design, and they're all worth discussing as to how they influenced it as a monster. Chemrice is the latest in the series' long and illustrious history of fire chickens, that started in the first game with Yankudku. Early game birds that were generally a bit gawky and had fire as their element. Many of these are likely some reference to the Basan, a Japanese yokai that was essentially a big chicken that when irritated would breathe cold fire, that also didn't ignite other things. Whilst such yokai were of course tougher than the average chicken, they're still based on birds that rarely get taken seriously, and are eaten, and so have resulted in strings of early game clowns. Another big mythological reference is of course the cockatrice, referenced in Chemrice's name. These were often small dragon-like creatures that had some association with birds and dragons alike, making them a fair comparison to some bird wyverns. However, when put into conjunction with dinosaurs, Anjanath and Quematrice's ecology, things get even more interesting. To start, Quematrice isn't just reminiscent of early game firebirds, he's also reminiscent of Anjanath too as a fiery theropod. Both were bullies with bird influence and fire rexes, but in many ways Quematrice is a foil to Anjanath, weak where Anjanath is strong, scavenging where Anjanath hunts, a wimp where Anjanath is too bold for his own good. Anjanath was, among other things, partially made from looking at modern depictions of dinosaurs, which explains much of its design and behaviour, feathers, frills, and generally high activity rates. The fact that Chemrice is a scavenger is really worth noting too, when combined with the chicken aspect. As is well known, in the 2000s there was a lot of hubbub about both T-Rex specifically and dinosaurs in general. The first point came from the essentially farcical scavenger debate when Big Jack Horner suggested it was a scavenger, and then claimed he was merely joking years later. The second being the increasing knowledge that dinosaurs were closer to birds than first thought, that the latter were descended from the former, and that the former may have even had feathers. Those alive and conscious at the time will likely remember that this went down like a cup of cold sick among the general populace and news circuits. T-Rex especially was viewed as essentially ruined, rendered both an impotent scavenger and now adorned with a drag queen coat of rainbow feathers. As there were really only two widespread renditions of a feathered T-Rex in popular media at the time, being either RuPaul or Giant Chicken, any notion of T-Rex having bird of prey designs, or generally more understated colours that would make sense for a predator, that are more seen today, were obviously not allowed, and wouldn't have fueled the bizarre outrage. T-Rex had to be either garish or a chicken. But the latter one is interesting, in that when dinosaurs were, and I guess still are compared to birds, it is invariably chickens they're compared to. Not ostriches or falcons or anything impressive, but the edible butt of many jokes. Again, the public just couldn't really stand the idea of avian dinosaurs, and generally tried to demean the notion of them at any opportunity. So with Chemrice, it really feels like a pastiche of these notions, and I do mean pastiche over parody, as Chemrice is still made with a degree of love as its own fleshed out being with these tropes, even if not the most magnificent roster member. Chemrice is a scavenger and a bully as well, being simultaneously useless and ignoble. The latter point is also exaggerated further by making him resemble a bird synonymous with being a dimwit, coward, and food, but without the concept of pure paleontological accuracy in its recreation, but rather just taking artistic inspiration from eras of pop paleontology. The old outdated depiction of the scavenger rex and the chicken rex have been combined and given new life as a fictional animal that can also serve as something of a benchmark of modern views of paleo reconstructions. Some say, why is Chem a brute when look like Chimkin? But to look at Chem's anatomy drawing, this feels like the point. Chemrice is essentially a normal theropod in chicken's clothing. Like Anjanath, he's also drawing to light comparisons between modern birds and dinosaurs, with the former being a subset of the latter. Chemrice is a big chicken, which means he's still technically a big theropod dinosaur too. The fact Chema is very chicken is worth noting too. As the chickeniest of the early game fire chickens, this now feels like a trope taken to its zenith, that they can't really push any further. Time will tell if this trope is continuously remodelled, or if Chemrice is the cherry on the cake for this notion, and something new takes over. Thanks for watching, and thanks as ever to my patrons Bonecrusher Hyena, Toxic Wolf, The Superus Duper, DJ, Samburgo, K Sandom, Octavia of the Fifth Fleet, Nickname 3110, Kieran McCarthy, Flyguns Archives, Hui Hui, Jabin, Phenomenon, The Belted Horned Warbler, Big Man Blastoise, Nathan Cross, Johnny, Oni, Tim Gojira, Teddy KGB, Waffles, Slashmaster 101, Dapperaptor, Aristocrat Mojo, Godzilla Prime 2, Original Username, Small Squid, Litten Gamer 111, Evilly, Howleth, Archerzor Queen, Tommy Choi, Jacob Wilcox, Seth Fake Last Name, Zaysir, Dodecablos, and Bazugazu Bakratsu Bakmatsu, who help keep the channel going with their generosity. If you're interested in supporting too, a link is added in the description, and any amount is always appreciated. Thanks as ever to Kamen Rider Moten for providing the digital artwork for this video, and to I Am the Kaiju King for both the skulls and great line drawings of Quematrice's behaviour. And finally, thanks too to Archelosaurian for both providing in-game dialogue and the isolated music for this outro too. For more of everyone's content, be sure to follow the links in the description too, where you can request your own artwork from Kamen, and to see new and upcoming skulls, and independent artwork from Kaiju King as well. Glad to see a lot of people enjoyed Raid Hour's video. Generally, I think the Monsters Inc. provides some fair talking points, but really a lot of the cast of Wilds have given me a lot more to think about for both these videos and broader topics. Chemrice's ecology and design do give a lot of good points to bounce off, as do the social monsters as well. Speaking of, the winners of the Patreon poll for the next video will be